My name's Joshua Chaplinsky, and I got a new book coming out August 6th from Clash Books. It's called Letters to the Purple Satin Killer, and it's an epistolary horror novel, kind of a faux true crime piece about a serial killer on death row, and it's told via all the letters he receives from, you know, everything from family members to survivors of his victims to fans of his. It's I would describe it as darkly comic and maybe a little transgressive, but it's also got some heart. And if you like horror or serial killers or satire, I think you'll really like it.
I was the last person I talked to. The episode that's going to be that I post tomorrow. So the person I talked to before you is Clay McLeod Chapman,
Nice.
and who is such a great guy. And
Clay's awesome. He's so cool.
Yeah, I really like that dude. And sorry, I got distracted for a second because I saw something on my screen and I was like, oh no, something's going wrong. Nothing's going wrong. So I'm talking to Clay and we're just talking about who's doing what in horror and stuff. And, because I'd read your book recently, but also just because it's notable, I mentioned Letters of the Purple Satin Killer. And I asked if he read it, and he said, yeah. And we talked about it a little bit, so it's in the episode. But
oh, nice.
One of the things that he said was, it is a bad touch book. And so I think what he was getting, for anybody who's listening who might not, know, just intuit from that. I think what he was saying is like, it kind of leaves you feeling not so great.
Sure.
Or at least parts of it do. So how do you feel about maybe getting categorized as a bad touch book? Is that an okay thing, or is that kind of what you're expecting?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, it's funny to me. I find it very funny. It's interesting because I when people ask like, oh, how graphic the book is, or like family members will be like, oh, like, you think I'll like it? Can I read it? Which is usually some sort of code for how off-putting is it,
Right.
from the normies. But so I feel like I'm not the best judge of how graphic my book is, or how triggering it might be for certain people, because relatives will ask me, be like, can I, I want to read it. What do you think? Will it upset me? And I'm like, nah, you'll be fine. And then my wife just gives me this look because she's read the book. And then, she took me aside one time afterwards and she was like, I don't think you realize just the content that is in this book. And I know you like this stuff and you're used to it, but, not everybody is going to be as acclimated to that sort of thing. So I try to, yeah, but a bad touch is a good way to put it, and that's something I would something I would wear with pride. Bad touch book.
Yeah, I imagine that was probably the case. But then, so that makes me think, what type of content would be hard to, stomach from the book? And my mind doesn't go to like one specific thing where I'm like, ooh, that was the moment that was like too fun. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously there's a ton of different things in the book, but I don't have like the one, like the worst moment or anything.
Sure.
Like, but things are all over the place. But honestly, weirdly, one of the things that comes to mind is like stuff that was more graphic and stuff isn't necessarily about killing at all, but it's that, I'm looking at my notes to get the name. There was that, I can't remember her name, the sex worker fan who would write in, and
Stacy SATIN.
Yeah, Stacy SATIN, and she was writing in about the things that she was doing graphically, sexually, and
Oh,
stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
like that comes to mind as something where people will be like, "Oh."
Sure.
But like descriptions of killing and stuff, I don't remember anything specifically that was like super out there, unless I'm just.
Yeah, I mean there is some, and but I feel like I didn't linger on a lot of it. I feel like it's very much presented matter of fact, and like he did this, and I'm not like describing it in gory detail per se.
Right.
It's just that when you think about it, you're like, oh, that's kind of gross or off-putting or whatever. But and I don't think the book is, wall to wall moments like that either. I
Right,
think
right.
they're peppered in there, and they're they're dealt with matter of factly, and I think that kind of makes them a little more palatable.
Right, because um there's a couple of interesting there's ways that you've managed that and that you built it so that it is that way. And so one of them is just basically, it's in the title, it's called Letters to the Purple Satin Killer. It's never any person, it's never the killer talking about anything. And
Hmm.
usually if we're hearing about something that the killer did, it's from some sort of like police report or something like that. So um it does seem well, and I know I'm bouncing all over the place, and it's gonna be hard to answer this because I'm going all over. But like, so like you said, the descriptions of killings are mostly um, pretty sterile because it's just like reported on.
Yeah.
But because it's letters to the person, there is an opportunity for people who are like kind of sick fans to say stuff. But I feel like even if that were the case, it didn't seem like that was overboard or anything either.
Yeah, because I guess, I mean, overall, like, that's not really what the book is about, like these
Right.
horrible things he did. And I think, thinking about it now, I think a lot of mentions of specific murders and crimes are all kind of upfront in the kind of
Yeah.
introduction by this fictional FBI analyst. And he just kind of, you know, runs through the timeline of, like, the first murder and this person and this how they were killed and stuff. And yeah, they're, some of them are pretty graphic, but again, they're just kind of like mentioned in passing. And then once you get to the book proper, it's all these other characters talking to him, and they're, it's more about them and their stories,
Yeah.
not necessarily the murders. Like,
Right.
some of them were affected by the murders, some of them are, surviving family members or grieving family members. But of course, those people aren't necessarily going to want to talk about the crimes in detail.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, and that's you said it so well, because it really did feel like we're seeing their relationship to the person, the notorious person, instead of actually like much of focused directly on the notorious person specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what excited me most about this project, is the kind of the way the quote main character, you never hear from them directly, and although you find out a lot about them and their story, it really is more about these other characters and their lives and how they were affected.
Yeah. It
And
made
I,
me think of like a if I was going to do it as an actual like visual image, you would see a bunch of crazy shit around like a silhouette, an empty silhouette of a person. Because like,
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. Um, which is kind of cool because you have to kind of intuit things based on what isn't being said or like is not directly being said, which is kind of a cool. That had to be challenging, I'd imagine, though.
Yeah, it interested me so much more, that approach, than you know writing a story about a serial killer, or even having letters from the serial killer. I just, the reason I chose to do it this way is because it excited me, and it's something. If someone else had written it and I heard that concept, I'd be like, oh, that's pretty cool. I want to check that out.
Yeah, it's unique for sure. And one of the things, so thinking about true crime and stuff like that, um, there's always kind of a line that you got to kind of walk if you're reporting on that stuff, where it's like you don't want to glorify the bad guy, you want to
Hmm.
honor the victims and stuff like that. But this is just kind of like a, you know, um, so and that makes me think of Richard Chismar did Becoming the Boogeyman, or Chasing the Boogeyman, Becoming the Boogeyman, and he
Hmm.
was um, he did a similar thing where he was in the book. Your name is at least used in your book, but his was very much like good versus evil, where this is more like a snapshot of like a cultural phenomenon, almost, is what it feels like, right? Would you
Hmm.
say that's accurate?
Yeah, just I mean, just kind of an example of how true crime is so popular now, and it always has been, but now it's just like streaming and all these documentaries. We're getting so much of it now, and because people can't seem to get enough of it, and there's always the question of, is this healthy for the viewer? Is this a healthy thing to obsess over, like crimes and murder and all that sort of thing? And I know there's the whole Psych 101 kind of explanation for that of confronting what you find scariest in a safe place and stuff like that. But I think in some cases, I mean, it could go beyond that into an unhealthy point, where you're not kind of testing yourself or testing your personal limits, but you're kind of then like reveling in it. I don't know. It's I wouldn't say I fall on either side of an argument like that, but I do think it's an interesting conversation. And so I definitely don't think it's black or white. And what I try to do in the book is have each character, that they don't have their way of thinking isn't very so binary, and their own moral fiber isn't necessarily so binary. You have people who were affected by this killer and had horrible things done to them or someone they loved, and you feel bad for them, and like you look at them as the victim, but then they also say things that you might be like, oh, that's not the best character trait either. So they're kind of, I tried to make everybody a mix of good and bad. It's not just these people were hurt or wronged, and they're the not the protagonist, but they're the side you should be rooting for, if that makes sense. So as I was saying, I guess it was maybe important's not the right word, but it was interesting to me that by leaving the Purple Satin Killer out of the equation as a character, more or less, and only hearing about him from the other characters, that was kind of my way of solving the problem of not reveling in this awful person who did these awful things, and reveling in their crimes.
No, don't do this.
Because it kind of focused more on the victims.
All right, so trying to get back to where we were at. So I'm just going to make a little note really quick in the episode for people.
Sure.
For anybody listening, we just had epic and really bizarre technical problems. So if you're watching the video, you might notice that it's being recorded in a different platform than it was before, and the audio might have been a little goofy or sound different now. We have been tackling weird stuff I've never experienced before, but we seem to be back on track. So fingers crossed we get through the rest of the discussion without any more issues. I'm going to knock on wood that's the case.
We're back. And the never experienced it before makes it sound like I'm the problem, because I'm the variable here.
That's we'll just run with that. You're the problem. So, but no, that's the thing. So I've been doing podcasting and stuff since like 2011 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There's never not a problem. Like there's always, and you work in like the film industry. I got to imagine that there's always some technical thing that's getting in the way of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, no matter how many times you've done it before, there's always an issue.
Yeah. So it's we build up our little calluses and stuff to these fucking issues and still make it a good conversation, I think, is the way that we're going to have to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, I listen to some more professional podcasts, and even they have problems. It's just like this podcasting thing, this internet thing. It's not an exact science, even after all these years.
Yeah, it's bananas. But we're back, and we're gonna just push through, and we're
better than ever.
Back and better than ever, absolutely. So I think that one of the things about the structure of the book that I thought gave you a bunch of cool opportunities was that since it's letters from people to Jonas Williker,
mm-hmm.
you had the opportunity to write in a ton of different voices, and so there's a couple of things I want to dive into with that. One of them is that you had the opportunity then to write in kind of a spectrum of seriousness to levity, a spectrum of like intimate to unfamiliar. You could really pretty much do anything you wanted to, and I do feel like there is a kind of a variety of feelings from the different people who are writing. And one of my first notes I wrote, and I typically don't write notes as I'm reading, but I pulled out the notebook and I started writing stuff kind of early on. Mom's letters are humorous, and one of the reasons is because of how oblivious she seems. And so a lot of the letters that take place in the book, for listeners, are from Jonas's mom, and she's that can't believe the bad things they're saying about my son kind of person. So she's like endlessly sunshiny, but every now and then, like, something will slip through that she had at some point blown off as innocuous that to the reader seems like, oh, that might have been a sign. So I know I just said a lot, but like this being able to write in a spectrum of voices, any thoughts on that? And then any thoughts specifically about the mom's kind of role in the unfolding of the story?
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity to write in all these different voices from all these different point of views, it was a lot of fun. It was daunting, but it was a lot of fun. And I appreciate what you said, how it came across that the voices are unique, and because that was definitely a thing I worried about going into it, where am I making each individual voice different enough? Like, I'm writing from the POV of this precocious 12-year-old preacher's daughter. Is she too precocious? Is this language believable? Would a kid even talk like that?
Right.
So to hear you say that is a little validating, and I appreciate it. And it's interesting because I had a similar thing in the Paradox Twins, although to a much lesser extent, where I was writing from 2 or 3 or 4 different POVs. And in that book, I had set myself up rules for each character's sections. Like some of them were in first person because they were excerpts from a memoir, and some of them were in third person because they were excerpts from a novel. And I did things like I had rules where like this character's younger, so she'll have less formal language, and this character's older and he's a teacher, so he might have more proper grammar. And then I'd be like, well, I'm not gonna let this character use adverbs or something like that. Just a few different things to try to kind of make the language and the voices stand out a little bit. And I didn't do that as much in Purple Satin Killer, even though there's kind of like tons more voices. But I did. It was more along the lines of like, this younger person would have shorter, simple sentences. The mother, the mother's not going to use contractions for whatever reason, because maybe she's older and she's not going to use contractions. And what else? I'm trying to think of other specific rules I gave myself. But it's just stuff like that, where there were these like grammatical rules, and then also then just the tones of each character,
Right.
and the tones of their letter. Some lent themselves more to humor, some were darker and less emotional. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And it took a while, because at the end when I finally finished, I went back and I separated each character's sections, and I read them all like as a group, and I was like, oh, this character wouldn't say this, or oh, this doesn't feel right. And I just kind of wanted to make sure that each one the voices were different enough.
Yeah. Well, as you were saying that, the thought that I had was that the voices were very strongly individual. Like, I didn't feel, sometimes, like you said, like when you're reading something, you'll feel kind of like a bleed over of this character is very similar to this character. maybe inauthentically, but I feel like whatever you did to make these, and I think that sometimes it's the situation, like they're such different people that it might just be that stark of a difference that like mom's not going to read like the sex worker girl or whatever, because they're just such different people.
Sure.
But yeah, they were very well individualized, and I felt like consistent too. So yeah, I'm glad
Well,
I'm glad you explained kind of how that worked, because I was thinking that that's one of the standout things about it.
yeah, I mean that was very important to me, and I definitely spent a decent amount of time on that and separating those. So thank you.
Yeah. And as far as the mom, did you have fun writing mom?
Oh yeah, I mean she was probably the very first character. Like when I wrote the original short story, she was probably the first character I wrote, and it just was obvious to me that she needed to be the type of mom who just was oblivious and couldn't believe her son did those things, but maybe deep down something's there, but she's just buried it and she doesn't want to believe it, and she's like, oh, you know, this is horrible. What's happening to you? When you finally get out of prison, we'll be a family again, and all this
Right.
stuff. You know, it's kind of it's sad, but it also lent itself to a lot of humor.
Right. But it also gave you an opportunity to plant not plant insert like not an origin story, but like younger parts of the killer's life into the story, kind of very organically. Like she would just make a mention of like um, the neighbor having such bad luck with pets or something like that, and it was just her goofy way of connecting with her kid. But I know that like the effect of it is like, oh, now we're seeing kind of like what that child life was like. So um, she was very useful for kind of establishing more of a picture of what the actual like person was.
Totally. Yeah, she was a great vehicle for sneaking in information about Jonas without being too obvious about it.
Mm,
Instead of having some like more info dumpy kind of things, or someone saying like he did this and he did this. It's like, the mother just referencing innocuous childhood things that maybe weren't so innocuous, like
right.
the time his cousin disappeared and was never found at the family picnic.
Right.
He couldn't possibly have anything to do with that.
Yeah, that was actually probably one of the more chilling things, which didn't come up, I don't think, super early in the book. But and I like how the book started out. It's weird because it started out pretty factually about like the bad things that he did, but then like the picture just continues to kind of crystallize as more letters happen. So
Hmm.
kind of a neat trick you pulled off there. Like we get a better and better picture of who this person actually is by just how he's interacting with people, or his past with them and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm really happy with the way that all worked out in the end. Because I think my initial impulse might have just been, oh, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we just don't hear from him at all? I didn't, and then I didn't realize in my head the kind of like challenge I made for myself,
Right.
that, oh, I have to really make this, present this character who really doesn't have his own voice. So yeah, and then towards towards the end, after I started adding all these different characters, and the way it was, I wrote it out of order, a lot of it, which
Hmm.
looking back was maybe not the smartest thing to do, because in the end it was like just the timeline of it with like the dates and people's ages, and
Oh yeah.
what just made sense logistically. Like it was really, for a while there, it was really hairy, and I just like I made charts and like printed everything out in different orders, and like was swapping pages around, and like it was a little nutty. I was afraid there for a bit that it kind of got away from me. That was definitely one of the hardest parts, was the kind of the collating of all the different stories.
Right, because, and for anybody who's listening, like the book is written, so it's epistolary, so it's just a bunch of letters, like the title mentions, but like there are dates for each letter, so
Yeah.
it's very specific to. It's connected to a specific time, and the book itself takes place chronologically between him being indicted, and then it goes to the trial, and it goes to life on death row and execution. So yeah, like you couldn't escape getting that right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did all sorts of like OCD shit that I'm sure like does not come across that no one will ever know. And even like it's for me, it was so important. Like all the dates had to make sense, like the
Yeah.
dates, people's ages, like when stuff happened. And like it was so confusing to me. I was like, most people who read this book probably aren't going to think twice about these dates. And if they tried to figure it out, like, they it would almost be an impossible task. But for myself, like I made a bunch of rules and stuff where like the mother only ever mailed her or wrote her letters on a Monday. So for the most part, if you look at the dates, all the mother's letters fall on a Monday. And I think early on in one of them, she says like, "Oh, I'm sorry, this one's late this week,"
Yeah.
and that one didn't fall on a Monday. But I did stuff like that, and I was also concerned about how far they were spaced. You know, each letter was spaced out, and like
Wow.
it was kind of a logistical nightmare.
Yeah. No.
I probably wouldn't do it again. Not like
Well,
this.
yeah, because and then the couple of things I thought of while you were saying that is that what probably complicated things were like when your characters, the different letter writers had to or did reference things that were happening in real life in quotes. Um, so lining up the timing of when the thing happened with when the letter comes out, but then also like if there was any crossover between two different people writing letters, keeping track of that had to be kind of a pain,
Yeah,
or like structuring that had to be difficult too.
yeah, it was a mess. And like I said, I did charts and graphs and Excel spreadsheets and I tried note cards and color coding. Like I dabbled in everything.
It's crazy. In your first of all, I have to give you credit for the afterword, because you really did dig into the process of creating this. And so, for anybody who typically skips an afterword or an author's note, I think that I love that stuff, and I always want reading all that stuff. But I know that some people skip it. But it really does give good insight into how much you cared about this and how difficult it was and stuff like that. But you also talked about some influences that you were working with, or that you had when you were writing this. And so I know that there was kind of the nugget that we talked a little bit earlier about true crime and the obsession with true crime and stuff, but you also talked about like some epistolary books and books about serial killers. So not making you recap that specifically, but like on that part of the process, like the inspiration for this specific type of story, what other kind of epistolary stuff or serial killer stuff um, really was on your mind?
Well, I guess well, first of all, thank you for reading the afterword. And the reason that's in there is because, again, that's something I really like, and that's important to me when I read a book or a collection. And then, like, if it's a collection, at the end, the writer has little story notes, and
Yeah.
like Stephen Graham Jones does it. That's probably where I stole it from. Stephen writes a nice little thing about each story and like the genesis of the idea and when he wrote it and stuff. And I think that's really cool. And so
Yeah.
that's why I did it, wanted to do that. So I think in pretty much every one of my books, I've had an afterword where I wrote a little bit of the backstory of the journey and stuff. And I hope, I know writers and stuff and nerdy types love that stuff. So I hope, always hope it appeals to people as much as it appeals to me. But so I would say then the germ of the idea for this as a whole, because it was a short story first, was when I was watching Making a Murderer on Netflix. So that kind of tells you how long ago that was. And I forget the guy's full name, Steven something, the titular murderer guy who they're
Mm-hmm.
making. I just remember one of the scenes in it was is talking about his fiance or whatever was basically a woman who he met while he was in jail, and like would talk to on the phone a lot and stuff, but like had never really, she visited him and stuff, but she was, kind of like, it's almost like a weird groupie situation, like, people who kind of fall for someone who's incarcerated for whatever reason
Right.
and strike up a relationship. So that was kind of the germ of the initial idea, where I was like, and I think there was something too in the episode I was watching, and I can't remember the specifics of like some sort of discussion of the information exchange between them, but then the information, say, she would find out outside of him from like the media or from other sources. And I found that really interesting, the kind of
Hmm.
like unreliableness of the information exchange between these two characters. And that was really the beginning of the whole thing. And of course, there's the character of Candace, who, she does kind of fall for the titular
Right.
character, and they have some sort of relationship, and yeah, so that was the start of it. And then I wrote the short story and stuff, and it's weird because I hadn't really, when I decided to write it as in the form of letters, it was because at first I was like, well, I was like, how do I do this? Am I going to make phone? Should I just write a bunch of phone transcriptions? And I was just like, oh, duh! Like people in prison write letters all the time, so that's the
Yeah.
perfect vehicle for this. And then when it came time to expand it into a novel, and I needed to come up with more characters and more information and stuff. Not everything necessarily I read for research was epistolary. Um, I read more of a more kind of some true crime stuff, like the Anne Rule book about Ted Bundy. I forget now exactly what it's called, like my something friend something or other, but it's like, the crime writer Anne Rule.
Mm-hmm.
She actually knew him and worked with him and had no idea and didn't find out, and she exchanged letters with him in prison and stuff. And there are definitely some big beats in Purple Satin Killer that I kind of took from like the Ted Bundy story, just kind of like just kind of as like the skeleton of like the arc or whatever. But so that was definitely another big influence as well.
I was going to mention Ted Bundy, primarily in the trial kind of section of the book,
Yeah,
where I was getting, vibes of, and that's not unique. Ted Bundy's not the only person who decided to represent himself against everybody's
yeah,
recommendations, and then it not going his well. But I think that's one of the ones that, because the Bundy stuff really blew up a few years ago. Like there was the even Zac Efron movie.
yep.
So yeah, I was kind of getting a Bundy vibe from part of that.
Yeah, because there was a documentary, and then the same director who did the Ted Bundy documentary made the fictional version with Zac
Right.
Efron. So yeah, there
Yeah.
was a lot of Bundy at the time.
Yeah, and I feel like, um, why am I blanking on his name? The guy who played Frodo, didn't he do a Bundy related movie too, or am I thinking of a different killer? Um,
Mm, I'm not sure now. There was
uh,
also, yeah, I'm not sure. And then there's also two. There was there's the graphic novel and then the movie version of My Friend Dahmer, which
oh right.
I watched and read that, and then that was another one. Um, yeah, but there's just so much out there, so much to draw from when it comes to the serial killer thing.
Right. Yeah. And then was there an angle that you went at for some of like the more obsessed fans, or was that just kind of you fabricated that stuff? Because there's a fan named Ginny who is I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this character, but so she's just a random woman who has no connection with this person and finds out about them on the news or whatever, and for whatever reason, immediately comes to the conclusion that they got this guy wrong. And it might be he's handsome and charming. There's no way he could have done those things, and becomes obsessed with being on his side and supporting him through it and everything. So like that one specifically, I'm like wondering if there was like a jumping off point for you, or if that was just let's see how crazy we can make someone.
I mean, that was another one that kind of started with the hybristophilia angle, the idea of women falling in love with convicts and stuff. So that one also kind of started there, but then just kind of, I don't know, I just kind of found that character as I wrote it, and just kind of
Yeah.
the further it got, like the kind of wackier it could be. Because she was more of the like, not a serious like I don't know. She's definitely, her character is more on the comical side as opposed to like the Candace character or like Stacey SATIN, because there's a lot of different women involved and they're attracted to this character in for different reasons in one way or the other. Some are more romantic in nature and some are just probably out of loneliness. And
Right.
so like, yeah, her character I had a lot of fun with, and I discovered a lot of that stuff as I wrote her.
Yeah, I liked that character. Like, obviously, I enjoyed reading the whole book, but like, I knew when I got to Mom or Ginny, like, it was going to be kind of quirky and cute and weird. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was nice to have like those kind of grounded kind of characters that you knew you were going to see a lot of too.
Yeah, and again, those were the Mom and Ginny were kind of like the first characters I created and when I was writing the short story. And so when I, turned it into a novel, I knew that they kind of had to like form the backbone of everything. Like they had to be consistent throughout the whole ordeal. Like some characters kind of come and go at different time periods, but those were like two of the main ones that really kind of, bring a cohesiveness to the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And really, I think that with those two characters, you're able to really highlight how crazy of like a cognitive dissonance. I can't say words today. Cognitive dissonance that people can have when they're really kind of invested in the belief they have, and how just bananas they can go to kind of keep their reality the way it's supposed to be.
Sure, and on the page, it's almost like, oh, this is crazy. How could anybody act like this? This would never happen in real life, but it's based on real life. It happens all the time, and people do things that if you saw it in the movie, you would be like, that's unrealistic.
Right. But it's 100%. Yeah, it's 100%. It happens probably far, far more often than we think.
Yeah.
But all right, so I'm not going to make this just let's talk about every character, because it would be so easy, because like that's the spectrum, that's like the different kind of elements to the story. But one that I'll bring up in as vague a way as possible, as to allow you to talk as little or as much as far as spoilers go, is there was one, and I think this goes a little bit more to Clay's bad touch experience. Is there's a series of letters by someone who calls themselves the one that got away.
Mm.
So if that's something that's too much spoiling stuff, we can avoid that. But I will say in a general way that was definitely one of the darker kind of threads that ran through the story.
Yeah. I won't go into too much detail, but I will say, the idea for that type of character I got from this found footage movie called the Poughkeepsie Tapes, which I really like.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of that now that I think about it, that probably had a decent amount of influence on me in the writing of this, because it is a kind of serial killer thing, and they're like discovering all these tapes he made and stuff. But there's a character in that kind of inspired the character of the one who got away, and it's kind of the Stockholm syndrome kind of thing, which
Yeah.
again sounds ludicrous, but happens time and again in real life,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But that's now that I'm thinking about that particular thread, that's probably one of the darkest parts of it, if you ask me. And
Yeah, I would.
not always easy to palate.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. Like, it's dark, but I'm glad it's there. It's like, to balance it out. Some of the threads are more humorous than others, but I didn't want it all to be silly, and I didn't want it all to be blood and guts and doom and gloom,
Yeah. Well, and then thinking about other, because like really one of the things the book does is highlight that when someone does something terrible, the impact is way bigger than maybe you might imagine. And to illustrate that, one of the people who writes letters is like somebody who went to like grade school with the dude or whatever, or elementary school or whatever. And so this is someone who wasn't even involved in that in any of the victims' lives or in even the killer's life after school, but still, when they learned about what happened, it had an impact on them. Like it. Oh, sorry about the thumbs up. That's a Mac thing.
Yeah.
So it really does kind of show like there's kind of a blast radius for like this type of thing when this thing comes out. Even so, that character, but also like a police officer, and like their interaction and how that affected them. So it really kind of does spotlight the idea that when something horrible happens, like the body count is a lot higher than maybe we even think about.
Sure. And then especially when that horrible thing is kind of broadcast even further as some form of, entertainment, if you will.
Yeah.
It just it's like the butterfly effect. It just keeps reverberating and just ripples in a pond, just keeps on going.
Yeah. Yeah. The sensationalization of it, I think, is because like, yeah, you get those people who either they get off on it or they just see it as like, entertainment, and they don't really. Yeah. There's a lot that's going on, but I think it was well represented. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big things I wanted to kind of address in the book, or not address, what's the right word? Just kind of, I'm blanking on the word I want to use.
Like allude to, nudge kind of thing.
Yeah, or just like, it was the discussion I wanted to have, basically,
Mm-hmm.
about all of this stuff in general, because like, I like true crime. I watch almost all of those documentaries,
Yep.
and you watch it and you're like, oh, this is horrible, this is awful, like, I can't believe this happened. But then, there is a kind of a thrill to it, but it's a different, you're watching something different than like watching Freddy or Jason chop up a bunch of fictional teenagers, like, it's not the same thing. And I think it's dangerous to kind of like put it in that same category of, that's of entertainment.
Right. And I believe, if I remember correctly, you even kind of addressed with so the person that ostensibly collected the letters for the sake of making them a book is the same name as you, but they're like a law enforcement agent, right? The FBI agent. No. Sorry.
Uh,
How did I get that wrong?
no, it's a little confusing. I do allude to Joshua Chaplinsky, like the author of Letters to the Purple Satin Killer, almost
Right.
as a fictional character, but there
Uh-huh.
is a fictional FBI analyst writes like the intro, but then there's also another character who was a law enforcement at the time and kind of like had an early run-in with him.
Yeah.
and like was suspicious but couldn't do anything, and then later on he finds out like, oh, I let this guy slip through my fingers or whatever.
Right.
So, and he becomes obsessed in his own way of
Yep.
like, being a witness at his trial, and then like, calling his mother on the phone and stuff like that. And I forget exactly where, but that was also another thing I pulled from real life, where in one of these documentaries or one of these cases where like the 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 police officer involved in the investigation was like striking up a relationship with like the mother of the killer or something like that, like not necessarily like a romantic relationship, but like would call her on
Right.
the phone and just like they would talk and stuff, and it's just like this weird thing.
That reminds me of the Jinx.
Hmm.
One of the things about that was that one of the jurors in the Galveston, Texas um, trial for Robert Durst ended up being like a good friend of Durst's after the trial,
Yeah,
after acquitting him.
yeah, so weird.
So like that shit does happen. The thing, all right. So the thing I wanted to say before I forget it was the in the in the somewhere in the book, I can't remember if it was at the very beginning or the very end, acknowledging the idea that like I believe this happened, or maybe my mind just made it up in my head, of like, is it the right thing to talk about this thing so that people know it happened, or if I talk about this thing, is it gonna like sensationalize it and inspire people to do more bad? I feel like you had that somewhere in the book, right?
Yeah, well, at least thematically, that's one of the
Uh,
main things I'm playing with, and because there's really no one, black or white answer that's going to work for
right.
all people. Like it's on a person by person basis of how we consume media and stories like this. Like you hear about uh like in the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, where like the things he would watch to like psych himself up to kill people and get off was like one of them was Return of the Jedi,
Right.
which seems like you would have never made that connection. Like, oh, watching Return of the Jedi is gonna kind of psych this someone up to go kill somebody, but it happened. And so then if that happens in that, that one case out of 1,000 or whatever, what are you supposed to do about that? Does that make Return of the Jedi bad? Like, should nobody watch it? You know?
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know. It's just obviously watching true crime documentaries is not going to make anybody go out and kill anybody per se, but the right person, anything will set them off.
Yeah, and I think that's what it comes down to is like, um, I feel that way when you hear someone like listening to a podcast and they're like, yeah, someone reached out and said what you said really got me through a hard time. And then they say, oh, but I never thought I'd have that kind of effect on someone. I think that people, I think of the best way to say this, what they need to hear in order for a change to happen is so specific to them that there's no way to anticipate it. There's no way to do anything about it.
Yeah.
To intentionally do a good thing in someone's life or to accidentally trigger someone to do bad stuff. It's just like you were saying. There's no way to anticipate it. It's just if it's going to happen, it's going to happen.
Yeah. Like I wasn't necessarily trying to make any sort of moral point per se with this book. It was just more a case of, here's a whole bunch of variables. Isn't this interesting?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In a moment of like a little bit of levity. So I just have, it's two words, a little note I wrote, is just says Ted Cruz.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's, I think that was a meme going around on the internet for a while that Ted Cruz was the Zodiac, but obviously he's way too young. But
right.
then people were like saying like his dad was a Zodiac killer, which is just it's funny to me.
And yeah, anytime we can get a dig in about
Yeah.
Ted Cruz,
Yeah.
I'm happy about that. But there was those moments too where it was just like you got to capture kind of what culturally was going on, which was kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
I had to actually look up because it was subtle, because it's not Senator Ted Cruz. It's like earlier in time. So I had to be. I'm like, is that Ted Cruz? And then I looked it up and I was like, good job.
Yeah, like I didn't want to name him outright,
Yeah.
but so again, going back to the whole timeline thing, I was like, well, at this point in time, he probably would have been here in his
Yeah.
career. No,
It was well done. I was impressed.
thanks.
All right. So one thing that I might as well mention that came out recently was that some of the negative stuff people are saying about the book. So just in general, early reactions you're getting to the book. Obviously, I've seen these blurbs you're getting, which are really awesome, but sometimes people are kind of knocking it a little bit. And in like the one that I'm thinking of was very like really nitpicky. I can't remember off the top of my head, but
Oh yeah, it just happened. It was the Publishers Weekly review.
oh, right.
Because like honestly, like all the early reviews and feedback I've gotten from just people on Goodreads and people with book blogs and stuff like that, and like the horror Facebook groups and stuff, like, has been very positive, and I'm really appreciative for that. And the blurbs especially, like, I'm just blown away that I got that many people of that caliber to say such nice things.
Mm-hmm.
But there was the Publishers Weekly review, and the Publishers Weekly it's a weird thing, because if you get a starred review, it's cool, and you see a lot of authors like, got my starred review in Publishers Weekly, and and that's awesome, and I would have been happy if I got that. And so when I read the review, at first I was a little disappointed, but then I kind of saw the humor in it, because it's basically just one short paragraph, and they're all written anonymously, which
Right.
writers have taken exception to the whole process and system of it. And the summation of the review was basically like, yeah, this whole thing, stretches the suspension of disbelief, and then all the examples they go on to give were literally either from the back cover copy or the initial preface section by the FBI analyst. So, and a good portion of that was devoted to with one description of a particularly maybe bad touch kill,
Yeah.
which I don't want to spoil here, that the reviewer found like, oh, this is not real. And of course I kind of base it on something that did happen in real life, so there you go. But yeah, so that was just basically the sum of their thing, was like, yeah, this book kind of just isn't really believable, and that was it. But I thought it was funny, the little pull quote that they had. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but it kind of tickled me because of the subject matter, that
Mhm.
was the crux of this little review, So
Yeah. It makes me wonder too, because that has blown up recently on social media. The idea of anonymous reviews,
mhm.
source like places that do anonymous reviews being kind of like problematic. And I've definitely talked to people in the past who, like, when they are asked to say something about a book, they straight up told me, I read the first chapter and the last chapter.
Oh, really? A reviewer?
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Because like I don't want to say this because it was a negative review, but I legitimately got the feeling that this person did not read the book. They read
Right.
the back cover, and they read like maybe they read the intro and maybe a couple letters past that, but like nothing that
Yeah.
was in that review gave me any indication that they read the whole book. And
Right.
I mean, whatever, it's fine. I don't know if I personally have a problem with the anonymous thing, because like, what's the difference if you know who wrote it or not? Like,
Right. And
I
the
think
only thing that would be was like it was
it's just a tech.
discriminatory or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, in my case, I don't think it was discriminatory.
Right.
I
Yeah.
just think they didn't really read the book or care to. I don't think it even registered to them that it
Yeah.
was satirical. So, but,
Yeah.
whatever. I was initially disappointed, but then I found the humor in it, and I probably got more attention because of the negativity of that review than I would have if I was just like, hey, I got a starred Publishers Weekly review. So
Yeah.
in the end, I kind of am happy with it.
No, that's a great point. And when I, saw your post and everything, I was like, well, if anybody is the right person to get in this situation, it's you, because from what I know of you, like, you really don't let shit bother you and stuff like that. And you can almost kind of see, like you do the funny side of it.
Yeah, totally.
So
I mean, to me, like, like just internet stuff, it's like it's not real life. I know some people have been hurt or take things really personally and like live online more than I do, and I understand that. But just for me personally, like I'm just trying to have fun with it, and I don't take it that seriously. Like I
yeah.
take my actual writing seriously, but if people on the internet are going to be like, oh, this guy sucks or whatever, like, what can you do? It's not. Again, I find it a little funny. Like maybe I like, it's a case of any attention is good attention, but it's kind of fun, the negative attention, sometimes.
You know what? And now that I'm thinking of it, I might be able to take at least a little credit for some of that internet thick skin, because one of the first interactions that we had was when I
Oh
was doing
yeah.
that booked podcast, and we made fun of a Lit Reactor article. And I think that one of the things that my podcast failed to do was to be very obvious about how we didn't take ourselves seriously. And so that sparked a little thing, but we almost immediately kind of reconciled. And I think
Yeah.
that because of that little dust up, I got to know you guys better, and I got to like be more invested in your success and stuff like that. So that fun little misunderstanding turned into probably one of the reasons we're talking right now. One of the
Yeah.
reasons I
Like,
read your books and stuff.
yeah, it definitely, I feel like it built a camaraderie. It's funny. It reminds me of I have a friend of mine who I'm really good friends with, who I've known a long time, since we were both in high school. And around the time we were in high school, or just after early college, we were in a band together, and he wound up kicking me out of that band. And then we didn't speak for like, not out of any malice or anything like that, but just we went our separate ways, and then we didn't really speak. And then like a bunch of years later, like I was talking to his wife, and she was like, yeah, we've been playing together and we need a guitar player, you want to come down and play? Now we've been friends again for like another good 10-15 years, and it's just like, he's one of my core group of friends, and it's something we joke about all the time. I kicked you out of the band, and
Yeah.
there's no hard feelings. It's funny. People love it. It's like it's a little in joke. It's great.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think sometimes we can get so worked up on the individual moment that we kind of lose track of the bigger picture. But back to early responses, you earned the early high praise, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Because like I went into this book not knowing exactly what to expect of it, and horror is not necessarily the label I would put on you. So something that
Sure.
very specifically lands in the horror genre, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I'm wondering what he'll do in this space. So how is it being kind of like lumped into the horror world? Like, is that something that you think that A is an apt label for this, and B, like that you would consider kind of moving into more?
I think the book's not like 100% true horror, and I've had some reviewers say, well, it's more of a crime thing and not necessarily full on horror. And but I'm fine with the horror label, and I feel like a lot of stuff I write, even if it's not strictly horror, it's like horror adjacent, and because I like a lot of horror, and I just like weird and macabre stuff, even if it's works its way into a more traditional kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
But I like with this book, like I'm happy for the horror label, because horror is popular. People love horror, and like it or not, like horror books online and stuff get a lot more attention and a
Yeah.
lot more publicity. So I knew going in that this book would hopefully, you know, do better or get a wider readership than my last book, because I was specifically angling it as horror or, you know, serial killer crime or whatever. So
Yeah.
you know, so I'm happy for that. And even though I don't necessarily think, you know, like I said, it's 100% straight horror, but and I wanted to go back to what you were saying about like the advanced praise and the blurbs and stuff. It's funny, like I said, I was, you know, blown away by the people who said yes to blurb this book and the amount I got and stuff like that. But it remains to be seen what kind of difference that makes as far as sales go.
Yeah.
So, you know, I see a lot of people online, you know, younger writers or people who are like, oh, I'm so nervous about asking for blurbs, about getting blurbs. And like, I feel there's this real big importance placed on blurbs. And sure, it's easy for me to say this now that like, oh, I got a blurb from Paul Tremblay and Clay McLeod Chaplin, you know, but I, I don't think that it remains to be seen, but I don't think that stuff is as important as people make it out to be. So like,
Right.
if you don't get that stuff, like it doesn't necessarily mean people aren't going to read your book, you know, because as of now, I'm not sure. It doesn't necessarily, just because Paul Tremblay said, you know,
Yeah.
he liked my book, doesn't necessarily mean other people are going to read it, you know? I mean, I hope it does. I hope it makes
Right.
some, but you know, you can't, you know, hang your self-worth on that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. Well, I think it's validating that you wrote something that you're reaching people. So like that's good. But I'll agree with you. Like really where you see momentum is when there's buzz, right? And there's like
Hmm.
word of mouth and like suddenly everybody's talking about it, as opposed to because like if you just have blurbs, that means they have to go look at the book in order to see what people said about it. So they kind of have to know about it in order to know about it. So yeah, you got a point there. I didn't really think about it that way, but like yeah, like when I see so like one thing that I'm trying to do to contribute to word of mouth is that I did a horror 2024 horror preview for the first 6 months of the year, where me and Becky Spratford and Emily Hughes talked about what we're looking forward to, and we're doing one for July through December. Recording that like in a week, and so we just it's if you don't, I don't know if you're familiar with Becky or Emily, but like Emily does that 2024 what's coming out in horror,
Hmm.
that like everybody looks at that list to see what's going on.
Sure, sure.
And Becky Spratford is like the librarian who like just, you know, and so I'm talking about Letters as
Nice.
one of my August books.
Yeah, and it's stuff like that, I think, that makes the real difference, you know, like the response from the people in like the horror Facebook groups and stuff, and like the advanced Goodreads readers. Like if that group really latches onto something and gets excited about something, like
Yep.
that's what you want. That's what really does the best for your book.
Yep. Yeah, the people that are the trusted kind of tastemakers and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there was a time when I would read any book that Steve Erickson blurbed, because Steve Erickson was like my favorite
Oh,
writer. And
yeah.
I figured like if Steve blurbs this, it's got to be weird. It's gonna be right up my alley. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. The longer I've kind of been involved in like, you know, independent publishing and writing and whatnot, you know, the more you kind of see the way blurbs work and what they actually are, you
Right,
know,
right.
and it's not necessarily that. So again, so I think like it's not healthy to place that much importance on them if you don't get them, you know? I don't know.
That's fair. No, no, that's a very valid point. Uh, it's still nice to see.
Yeah.
um,
And it's funny though, because then when for the Paradox Twins, I I I requested a blurb from Steve Erickson, and he gave me a really great blurb, and I was, really flattered and honored. But then there was also a little part of me that kind of just like doubted it. I was like, did he really like this? Or is he just being a nice guy? Because I supported him over the years and interviewed him and stuff. Like it was a little moment of self doubt.
Sure.
But
yeah, I guess like
because there's like there was a part of me that felt like I was bothering him with this. Like
sure.
here's this writer I revere who must be so much more important and busy than I am, and he must be getting requests for blurbs, every day, and here I am coming in like, bothering him with my little book, my first book, like, hey, could you do me a favor,
Right. Yeah, I guess it's good not to have like too much stars in your eyes when it comes to that stuff. But like it seems like it's one of those things where we all know it's got to be done, and nobody wants to go through the process of getting them.
Yeah.
So like, it sounds like it's one of the least exciting parts of the process of putting a book out.
Yeah. Although I've started to think, because I got so many with this book, that I should be allowed to skip the next book and get no blurbs for my next book. I think I'm just going to say, listen, refer back to the blurbs from Purple Satin. There was plenty of them, more than enough for this book too. Like I feel like I've called in all my favors. So
you need a little time to refresh. Well, You could do that. They do that where it's like praise for other books at the beginning of an author's book. So yeah, you can just you can coast on these blurbs as long as you want to.
Yeah, man, that's it. These are the rest of my career, baby.
Right on. Well, so on the topic of writing, is there any projects you're working on right now?
Yeah. I think I mentioned in the Afterword the kind of like work in progress I was working on before I kind of pivoted to write Purple Satin Killer, because I thought it would be easier and I would get it done faster, which obviously turned out to not be the case.
Yeah.
So that's a project that has been very close to completion. I'm just like, tinkering with it and stuff. And I'm hoping to get back to it once this comes out, hoping to get back to that, wrapping it up quickly. And then as far as, I don't know, putting it out and turning it around, who knows, who knows how that's going to go. But so
yeah,
I do have that. And that is more of like a straight up horror novel. I believe that sits firmly in the horror genre. It's definitely a kind of like the kind of horror I really like, which is kind of like, I would, an easy way to label it would be like Lynchian kind of horror, like that sort of just bizarreness that appeals to me. So
awesome.
Yeah, so that, hopefully that one's I'm finally going to finish that. Hopefully that's the next one, and then after that I haven't really thought that far ahead, to tell you. I got enough stories for another collection. I would like to do that, but as far as like then another novel idea, I got some irons in the fire, some ideas that have been percolating, but yeah, we'll see. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Right on.
I don't know. Part of me wants to be like, listen, if nobody buys this, there ain't going to be any other novels, or I'll write it, but it's just going to be for me. So if you really want to read it, you got to buy this book. But
that's fair.
I don't want to be petulant about it.
Well, but it's an understandable sentiment. So one thing that kind of I wasn't necessarily expecting from the Afterword that I got was how vulnerable you were with the process of it, and it's one of the things that stood out to me was that you were talking about kind of the self-doubt that went into the process, and I feel like I don't see that a lot in an author's. Well, I know they talk about that type of thing, but seeing it in the Afterword and kind of experiencing you talking about how kind of unsure you were about certain things at times and stuff I thought was a really great addition, especially with such a odd topic, but uh, to um, to respond to your whatever doubts and challenges that you had in the afterword, I would just say that you pulled off a fucking cool story, man. It's just really entertaining, and I know that the word unique is like stupid, but it's not something that people are really doing, and it was refreshing and different in a way that I really appreciated. So awesome that you were so you know vulnerable about your process and what it meant to you, but like it also made me feel like he took this very seriously and he cares about the quality of this thing. So I thought that was really cool to include that as part of your afterward.
Oh, well, thank you, man. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I felt it was kind of important to put that stuff out there because I mean you see all over social media, all all different writers in all different stages of their career talk about imposter syndrome and having self-doubt and like, oh, my first draft is crap, this book is horrible, and like even like well-known writers who've sold a lot of books. And I just think it's kind of important to reiterate that it's not easy and that everyone doubts themselves, and it takes a lot of work, but if you persevere, like, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but if you persevere and you finish it, like, it'll get there. You just gotta give it the amount of time it needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely a good thing for people to hear. Um, and yeah, pretty inspirational. So I thought that was cool.
Woohoo.
And on that note, I just want to thank you, first of all, for taking the time and navigating such stupid technology issues.
I
But
hate
also,
technology.
I know. Well, yeah. So one day we'll just be able to teleport to each other and hang out and that'll solve problems.
Yeah.
But also, thank you for such an entertaining book. I will be pushing it as much as I can to the world because I think it's awesome. So thanks for putting in all the work to make it possible.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for reading, and thank you for having me on the podcast.